Nikki Haley dropping a bombshell over the weekend. The former UN ambassador is saying she refused requests from former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly to help them undermine the president. Writing this in her new book, Kelly and Tillerson confided in me that when they resisted the president, they weren't being insubordinate. They were trying to save the country. Haley says she was offended that they tried to enlist her in the effort.
Instead of saying that to me, they should have been saying that to the president, not asking me to join them on their sidebar plan. It should have been, go tell the president what your differences are and quit if you don't like what he's doing. But to undermine a president is really a very dangerous thing.
Let's bring in Mike Huckabee, former Arkansas governor and Fox News contributor. Governor, good morning to you. Some very strong revelations from Nikki Haley in this new book, and she uses examples of two disagreements that she had with the president, and she took them directly to President Trump when she had that.
And that's exactly what a person should do if they have a disagreement with the President of the United States and they work for the President. I've got nothing but great respect for John Kelly. He earned 4 stars on his shoulder, and I have nothing but respect for that. But there's something about Nikki Haley. I totally agree with her, and I applaud her for her candor, but also her insight into something very simple that both of these guys should have understood. Nikki Haley had something they didn't, and maybe that's why she understood it. She had been elected to something. She had been governor. She knew what it was like to have been elected by the people. She recognized that that is the calling, and that when someone serves at the pleasure of the elected person, it is not their job to arrogantly assume that they know more than he does, that their opinions are more right than his is. And I think for Rex Tillerson and even for General Kelly to suggest that somehow they had the right to go around the elected president for his own benefit, that's insulting, it's arrogant, it's just plain out constitutionally wrong.
John Kelly responded to Haley's claim in that book and said this: if by resistance and stalling she means putting a staff process in place to ensure the president knew all the pros and cons of what policy decision he might be contemplating so he could make an informed decision, then guilty as charged. What did you think when you saw that by John Kelly?
Well, it was about as good a response as he could give. And again, I love John Kelly. I think he's one of the great human beings I've ever met. I have nothing but regard and respect for him. In this case, though, I think he was wrong. And the reason he was wrong is because as chief of staff, it's his job to directly confront the president, but then it's his job to either accept that the president didn't take his advice, or he always has the right to resign and say, Mr. President, in light of this, I can't serve you. But he doesn't have the right to undermine the very person that he's there to serve. And it is his job to help carry out the policies of the president, not to change the policies of the president. He may not like them. He may not agree with them. He has the right to leave. He does not have the right to act like he got elected when, in fact, he didn't. Donald Trump got elected, and it's his policies that matter.
Yeah, these are brand new revelations by Nikki Haley in this new book. And what do you think her goal is by putting this out here, Governor?
I think she's telling the story, a good story that she has. She served this president very admirably. And I think one of the things Nikki is pointing out is that as a former chief executive, she understood that there was a role she could play in going directly to the president and expressing her views, which she did on more than one occasion. She didn't make a public press conference out of it. She didn't go and wave flags about it. But once she presented it, she accepted his response, whatever that was, and she went back to work. That's how it's supposed to work. And I think Nikki Haley really did herself quite well by telling this story in the way she did. As contrast, Rex Tillerson was never elected. I think problem with Rex Tillerson from the beginning, he had run a big corporation, ExxonMobil. He went into the State Department as if he ran the State Department and his ideas were what mattered. I think he had a hard time accepting that he worked at the pleasure of the president, and it was not his policies that were supposed to be instituted, it was the president's.
Very interesting stuff. She said in a tweet yesterday that this book is about her, quote, experience in life and government. So a lot coming out of that. Meanwhile, a lot will come from this week as we enter a brand new week in the impeachment proceedings by Democrats, Governor. We know that now key witnesses by Republicans are being called forward. We are already seeing efforts by Democrats to refuse or to resist those witnesses. What do you expect will come of the first week of these public hearings that Democrats are holding, Governor?
What I expect is an enormous level of showboating from the camera-hungry Adam Schiff and his colleagues, who will try to present that somehow they've uncovered the greatest scandal in the world, when in fact what they're doing, Sandra, they're covering up the greatest scandal that ever was. This is truly about a conspiracy, an attempted coup, and a cover-up on the part of establishment Washingtonians and deep state actors who are scared to death that first Donald Trump got elected, and now that he likely could be reelected and will be, unless they find up some phony reason to come through with some impeachment hoax that they've come up with. And I wish the American people would take a step back, regardless of their affiliations, and ask themselves, is this a fair process when the president cannot get his own witnesses and his side of the story told? And even hardcore Democrats ought to be afraid of a process in which only one side gets to tell a story. That's not very American.
Well, notably, one of the biggest witnesses that Republicans have put on that list is the Ukraine whistleblower. Democratic Rep. Eric Swalwell responding to that list from the GOP with this.
Well, as Chairman Schiff has said, we're not going to go back in time and revisit conspiracy theories that are implicated in the president's. I don't see any relevancy with the Bidens. There's no evidence that anything improper has happened. And witnesses have been asked about the Bidens and said that Vice President Biden, in every way, these witnesses and the way they worked with him, conducted himself with integrity.
Governor, you referenced that GOP witness list as revisiting conspiracy theories. Final thoughts.
Somebody show Eric Swalwell that tape of Joe Biden bragging about how he told the Ukrainians that if they didn't fire a prosecutor within 6 hours, the money was off the table. And he used some rather salty language, and he was boasting about it in a forum, publicly. Show him that tape and tell me there's not something to investigate. Swalwell is totally off the cracker on this one. His cheese has fallen to the floor.
Governor Mike Huckabee, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for kicking off the week with us.
You bet. Thank you, Sandra.